mean, look at us, yo. Look at us. Here we are. Hi, everybody. We've now gone from, chemistry, atoms, into organic chemistry, carbon and hydrogen based, big molecules, into cells. We made this transition from chemistry to life. We talked about that, discussed that. And now we're smushing cells together to form tissues. And that's what we're going to talk about, is what are tissues. And I wanted to start with this this is the first animal here. It's defined as the first animal, which is a sea sponge, which looks something like this. And their evolution is actually really interesting because this gives us our first glimpse into what, multicellularity and just kind of beginning to form tissues is. So one easy way to kind of define tissues is cells working together to perform a specific function as a whole. It's a collective of cells coming together to get some job done. So if we go down in the sea, down in the depths of the sea, or actually not the depths, but kind of near the surface, there's these tiny little things called protists, and a specific protist is called a choanoflagellate. And it kind of looks like a little sperm with a skirt. And they can swim around like individuals, and they use this little flagellum to swim around, and they use this little skirt to catch food. And then they eat that food. They can also hang out and form little clusters of these choanoflagellates and all kind of form this little ball, little sphere. And they stick to the surface, and they all beat these flagellates, and little food particles get stuck to these little skirts. And these are thought to have then evolved a little further, and it's like, all right, well, now we got this little stalk, this little sphere. Well, what if we make a little invagination that's really good at catching food here? It's like a little mouth, you could kind of say. So this is all beating, and it's bringing the food all down in here, so the food can't leave, and then it's being absorbed by this little choanoflagellate, Pac-Man looking ball kinds of things. And then let's say you just made this kind of all stationary down here, and you put some holes in the side, and boom, you got a sponge. And the difference between this and a sponge is that there are specialized cells in a sponge. And this is maybe a little weird looking, but a sponge is, something like this. It's got some pores in it on the side, it's got a big opening, and all on the inside here, there are these little choanoflagellate looking things that got little skirts and little tails, and they frickin' pump water through this thing. So water is being pumped through this sponge because of these little flagellates beating. And we actually call the cells within a sponge choanocytes because they evolved from them. Pretty nifty. So that's one cell type inside of a sponge. Then there's this other cell type that kind of makes up the base of the sponge. Kind of looks like an epithelium almost. And then we have another cell type. So these guys are beating their little tails, and they got their little skirts, and they catch a little food particle. Let's say food's coming through because water's flowing. Boom, they catch it. They bring it in here. They could eat it, or they could pass it over to this guy right here, which is an amoebocyte, and they'll take that little food particle. It's basically like the vascular system of the sponge. They'll take this food and feed this cell, or go down here and feed this cell. So we got these three different cell types that are kind of coming together to form a sponge. Sponges are said to not have true tissues because they don't have specific tissue layers with a very organized kind of structure. I don't really know. This seems like a tissue to me. It's multiple cells coming together to perform a task to make a sponge, but I don't know, other biologists don't really consider this a true tissue. But this is, you can see the beginnings of a tissue in these little sea sponge. We have at least three different cell types coming together to form a functional layer of cells that are performing different functions, but it's all to feed this sponge and to keep it alive. It's pretty cool. So we're going to go through, and I'm going to try to keep this week short and talk about the human tissues. So this is kind of where we started as animals, and now what have we done throughout, another couple million, 100 millions of years of evolution? What have we done? Well, we've developed something like this, which is a very specific tissue. This would be our nervous tissue. This would be our nervous tissue. And I know I'm gonna do some drawings here for you this week, but I'm also gonna show a lot of pictures just because we're looking at tissue, so I want you to see some of it as well. But you can draw me like a little sketch of this guy, or print out this picture, or find this picture on the internet, or however you want to do it. But this is us. This is all of our senses and everything come in from this big ass tissue. Oops. Oh, I cussed. And it's a pretty interesting way to look at a human. And if we were just this, we would be dead. Or would we? Yeah, we would definitely be dead. And we'd be real sensitive. We'd be hurting all the time. We have to have other tissues over this to protect us and to allow us to move. We couldn't move if we were just this. This tissue is very important, but it only does a couple things. So one way you can think about a human is we are a nervous system, because that's all of our senses. Everything comes in and out of our nervous system that we know of. But we're encased in all these other tissues, like a spacesuit. And we're going to talk about the nervous system and the other tissues and how they kind of come together to build this human and make these organs. And this is kind of where we're going to spend the rest of our time this semester, is talking about these things. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting way to look at a human. And one little note here is that I don't actually see on here. So here, right around here, we have a heart, and that thing's got 40,000 neurons. But they didn't include those here. It's pretty interesting. We'll talk more about the neurons in the heart later on. Okay, but let's get into the 4 different types of tissue. And I'm going to pull up some pictures here as examples. Yeah. And we'll go through those. That's actually one of them. The nervous system's one of them. So I guess, well, let's not start with that one. Let's start with this one, which is probably my favorite. Epithelial tissues. We'll just call it epithelial. Epithelial, that's plural. Singular is epithelium. And this means above. I don't actually know what thelial means. This means above or on top. Okay, and these, what do these do? We'll put the function over here for all of these. Function. These line, they line us, the outer layer. They're useful for protection. Absorption. Just to name a few. Protection and absorption. They line us. They're the outer layer of something, useful for protecting us. And let me pull up a little picture here. Let me pull up a couple actually. Yeah. So we saw something like this, which is our skin. This is our skin, and it's kind of blurry. Oops. This is our skin right here. So we got this, underlying dermis. We got the epidermis. So that's one example. Here's a kind of cross section of our intestinal tract here. You can see we've got this outer layer here would be the epithelium. All these little cells here making up these villi and microvilli. So this would be some examples would be our skin. and digestive tract. Other examples would be like our lungs and our trachea, inside our ears, inside our cheeks. All of that is epithelial tissue. Digestive tract, which is very important for absorption. Anything that has a hole through it and it lines that hole, or anything that's on the outside, all of that is an epithelium. And here's another little example of, it's actually, I believe this is the surface of an embryo, which forms these little ciliated cells later in development. So these little cells have little hairs. So surface of an embryo is an epithelium as well. It's on the outside. Okay, so that's one, epithelial. Boom. Wonderful. Making that a little bigger. We'll move that over there. Epi means on top or above. So it's like on top tissue. Okay. All right, cool. That's the epithelium. All right, another example is connective tissue. So this is a second type. There are 4 types of tissues that we classify in the human body, and we're just kind of going over the overview of those. So connective tissue. And these connective, it's an accurate description, but it can be kind of misleading. And let me just give you an example of why, and that's because blood is a connective tissue, and people don't often think of that. So connective tissues are defined as like having a lot of like fewer cells with a lot of extracellular space. Fewer cells with a lot of extra cellular space. We'll often have, let me actually put this down here. They will often have lots of extracellular means outside of cells, fibers. So for example, collagen or elastic fibers, elastin fibers, things like that. Connective tissues, kind of a classic example here would be like loose connective tissue. This is what would like line our organs, for example. Blood, let me see if I got a good image of blood here. I think I got a David Goodsell drawing. Yeah, blood here. Boom. We looked at blood on the slide. I have another actually image here. So this would be a red blood cell and plasma. And I got another picture of blood here. Yeah, that we looked at. Something like this. Beautiful. So we got red blood cells and white blood cells, little platelets here and there, 2 neutrophils and a bunch of red blood cells. And then all this clear part would be this. So this is a connective tissue just in the sense that there are fewer cells with a lot of extracellular space. You could see that in kind of both of these images here, with the red blood cell being down here. This is the red blood cell packed full of hemoglobin, and then all of this is the protein in the plasma. And this would be connective tissue, loose connective tissue. And we'll go through more examples of these and kind of describe what this is, connective tissue, and draw these out. Loose connective tissue, which would like line our organs. And there are a lot of other types of connective tissues as well. Dense, fibrous, adipose, bone is a connective tissue. All right. The next one that we're going to talk about, epithelial connective, talk about the muscle tissue. And this is you could kind of think of this as a connective tissue, but it doesn't follow one of these rules, and there's not a lot of, there's a lot of cells packed in here. And we looked at these, and they are also specific for movement. They allow us to move. We looked at these in lab. I'm gonna pull up some pictures, and we're gonna go through these kind of in more detail too. I'll just pull up these pictures right now. All right, so we got a real zoom in here. And then we got another picture coming in. And that was not the greatest, but well, I'll go with it. Boom, boom, boom. Come on, baby. Beautiful. Okay, muscular tissue. So this is obviously, what does it do? Allows us to move. Also pumps our fluids and food, and also gives us some protection, right? Muscles are pretty tough, pretty hard to get through. You can take a punch and things because of your muscles as well as your fat. And there are 3 types, and we'll go through these in more detail. There is skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. And we went through that in lab, but we'll go through the kind of specifics of those and what they do. And last but not least, we've got nervous tissue. Nervous tissue, we'll make it in blue. Nervous tissue. Nervous. I'm so nervous, bro. Okay, nervous tissue, what does this allow us to do? Actually, let me pull up a cool little picture of a neuron here. There's a little neuron. We've also got our dude up there. Nervous tissue allows us to sense and respond to the environment, right? And I'll go through and kind of what we're going to then do is go through in detail, boom, 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 through these. And I'm not going to spend too much time on them, on each one. But that's kind of the plan here. And yeah, I think that's it for this one. So, to go back to our little thing, we ended with nervous tissue. Without these other tissues, epithelial, connective, or muscle, that's all we would be. So these kind of fill in the rest of it to make this whole little thing. This is epithelial tissue. I'm using my muscle system right now, and it's all connected to each other. And I'm allowed to breathe and be alive because of my blood, which is a connective tissue. It's all held together. My bones give me structure and allow me to move. Otherwise, I'd be a pile of tissue. Just like my brain would be all smushed. I mean, without a connective tissue, your brain would get destroyed. So we're going to learn kind of about the microanatomy, really, is another term for this. We're going to be learning about the microanatomy of a human today. And another word for that we looked at in lab very early on, microanatomy of a human, is histology. Histology. And this word here, histo, is Greek. It means tissue. So tissueology, and ology means study of. Ology means study of. So we're studying tissues today, study of histology. So I'm going to be showing, more little images like this. I mean, this stuff is just, it's incredible to kind of look at this. Okay, I'll shut up now. I'll see you in the next one. We're going to talk about epithelial tissues and draw some pictures.